Okay, so today we're diving into some really, really heavy stuff.
Yeah,
It's a tough one, but a case that I think we need to talk about.
absolutely.
The case of Dr. Joël Le Scouarnec.
It's a case that's really hard to even fathom.
Yeah.
Hundreds of potential victims, decades of alleged abuse.
Yeah, this is considered the biggest pedophilia case in French history.
Absolutely.
And it's even more disturbing when we think about the fact that this was a respected surgeon.
Right.
Someone that, parents entrusted their children to.
Exactly.
So we're gonna unpack not just the horrifying details, but also try to understand how this was allowed to go on for so long.
Yeah.
We've got a ton of sources for this one. We've
Yeah.
got news articles, court documents, legal analogies, and even excerpts from Le Scouarnec's personal diaries.
Right. And those diaries are really the crux of the case.
Yeah, and they're chilling.
Extreme.
The diaries were discovered in a police search back in 2017.
That's right.
And they're meticulous records of the alleged abuse.
They are very detailed.
Dates, times, names, ages. It's
Like he was documenting his crime.
in one entry, he even addresses a child victim by name.
Yes.
And ends with, "I love you." It's just,
Unthinkable.
yeah, it really is.
Hard to even process.
And it wasn't just the diaries. Police also found spreadsheets
Yeah.
with similar information.
Right. Victim names and, summaries of the alleged abuse.
The level of detail is,
Staggering.
yeah,
Really is.
he wanted to be caught.
It's a question a lot of people are asking.
Yeah.
Did he believe he was untouchable?
Right.
Did he think he could keep getting away with it?
Well, let's back up for a second.
Okay.
Let's give some context.
Sure.
Who is Dr. Joël Le Scouarnec?
So on the surface, he was a very successful gastrointestinal surgeon, worked in both private and public hospitals across the Brittany region of France.
Okay, so a seemingly normal career.
Yeah, seemingly normal career treating patients of all ages.
All right. But then underneath that facade,
These horrific allegations of abuse, primarily targeting children.
and this wasn't even his first run-in with the law?
No, in 2005, he is convicted of possession of child abuse imagery,
Okay.
and he received a 4-month suspended sentence.
Oh, wow.
But incredibly, his medical clinic was never even informed about the conviction.
So he was able to continue practicing?
As if nothing happened, exactly.
Oh, my gosh.
And then a year later, when a whistleblower alerted the medical system, the regional oversight body of doctors concluded that possessing child abuse imagery didn't violate medical ethics.
Wait, what? How?
It's a decision that many people are now questioning in light of everything that's come to light.
Yeah.
And it gets worse. In 2008, a hospital director actually hired Le Scouarnec, knowing about his prior conviction.
Knowing about it, and they still hired him? What was their reasoning?
The director's justification was that there had been no physical aggression.
Wow, as if viewing child abuse imagery wasn't harmful enough?
Exactly. It's a disturbing example of how institutions failed to grasp the severity of the situation.
Yeah, there were so many missed opportunities to stop him. So many red flags that were ignored.
Yes, and those missed opportunities had devastating consequences for the victims.
Let's go back to those diaries for a moment. What exactly did they reveal about the extent of the abuse?
Well, the level of detail is what's so chilling. He not only named victims, but often described specific acts of abuse, sometimes even using disturbingly affectionate language.
It's like he was trying to normalize it,
Yeah.
or convince himself that it was somehow acceptable.
Right. That's one of the most unsettling aspects of this case.
Yeah.
This man was a predator who was able to operate in plain sight, using his position of power to manipulate and abuse his victims.
I remember those spreadsheets we mentioned.
Yes.
It's like he was documenting his crimes like some kind of twisted collector.
It does paint a picture of someone very methodical, almost obsessed with keeping track of his victims.
Didn't his lawyers initially try to claim that those diaries were just fantasies?
They did. They argued that the diaries were just Le Scouarnec's private thoughts and didn't reflect actual events. However, Le Scouarnec himself later admitted to writing them and to being a pedophile.
So the diaries were real,
Yes,
and they were a reflection of his actions.
exactly.
And then there's another disturbing piece of the puzzle, child-sized dolls that were found in his home.
Right.
This is where it gets really creepy.
It does.
Tell me more about those dolls. What did investigators think they were used for?
Investigators believe that Le Scouarnec used those dolls for sexual gratification. He reportedly named them, dressed them, and used them to act out his fantasies.
It's hard to even process that this man was entrusted with the care of children, and this is what he was allegedly doing behind closed doors.
This case forces us to confront a very uncomfortable truth. Predators can exist in any profession, even those we consider noble and trustworthy.
It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that we need to be vigilant, especially when it comes to the safety of children.
Absolutely, and that leads us to the question of how this abuse was able to go on for so long.
That's what's so baffling. How could he continue practicing medicine? How could he still have access to children after that 2005 conviction?
Well, that's where the systemic failures we talked about earlier come into play, a tangled web of missed opportunities, bureaucratic oversights, and a failure to truly grasp the seriousness of the situation.
Yeah, it's like everyone involved was looking the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And remember how the FBI actually tipped off the French police back in 2004
Oh, yeah.
about Le Scouarnec accessing those illegal websites?
Yeah, that's right. That was a clear warning sign.
But instead of doing a surprise search,
right.
the police called him in for questioning.
They did. They basically gave him time to cover his tracks.
Unbelievable.
A lawyer from Voice of the Child,
Yeah,
which is an organization that advocates for children's rights,
right.
pointed out that a surprise raid back then could have potentially stopped the abuse before it escalated.
Oh my gosh. It's mind-boggling how many chances were missed.
It really is.
And then you have the issue of France's statute of limitations,
Right.
which, prevents rape prosecutions after a certain amount of time has passed.
Right.
And because of this, around 80 potential victims
Wow.
couldn't even be included in the current case.
That's a shame.
So many lives affected.
It is.
And for many of them, justice is simply out of reach.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
It really exposes the flaws in the system and the need for serious reform.
Absolutely.
It also makes you wonder how someone like Le Scouarnec, a respected surgeon, could get away with this for so long.
Yeah, one journalist covering the trial talked about the need for French society to examine its collective blindness.
Right.
When it comes to figures of authority, especially doctors, there's this tendency to assume that people in these positions are trustworthy.
Right.
And to dismiss or downplay accusations against them.
Like the very idea that a doctor could be capable of something like this was just inconceivable to some people.
And that's a dangerous mindset. As we've seen time and time again, predators often use their positions of power and authority to exploit the vulnerable.
It's a sobering reminder that we can't just blindly trust those in positions of authority. We need to be critical, and we need to listen to those who come forward with allegations of abuse, no matter who the accused might be.
Absolutely. Now shifting our focus to the victims, it's important to acknowledge the profound and lasting impact this abuse have had on their lives.
Reading their stories is incredibly difficult. The trauma, the depression, the anxiety, the difficulties in relationships, it's all there.
One of the most heart-wrenching stories is that of Mathis Vinay, who was allegedly abused by Le Scouarnec when he was only 10 years old.
Mathis's story is just tragic. He died of a drug overdose at the age of 24 after years of struggling with mental health issues stemming from the abuse. His grandparents who raised him have been attending the trial seeking justice on his behalf.
Yeah, they've talked about how his behavior changed drastically after his hospital visit. He became withdrawn, aggressive, and eventually turned to drugs and alcohol to cope with the pain.
Imagine the guilt they must feel knowing that they took him to the hospital for a simple stomach ache, and that's where the abuse occurred.
It is a horrific thought, and sadly, Mathis's story is not unique. Many of the victims have reported similar struggles with mental health relationships and even their own sexuality as a result of the abuse.
It's like having your childhood stolen, your sense of trust shattered. And for many of them, the memories were repressed, buried deep down, only to resurface years later when they were contacted by the police.
Right. Imagine being confronted with these horrific memories years after the fact. It's like having a bomb dropped on your life.
And for many of them, the abuse wasn't a one-time occurrence.
That's right. Some victims were allegedly abused multiple times, often under the guise of medical examinations.
Right.
It's a horrifying betrayal of trust, made even worse by the fact that it happened within a system that was supposed to protect them.
This case really highlights the power dynamics at play and how those dynamics can be abused.
It is a reminder that we can never be complacent, that we always need to be questioning and challenging those in positions of power to ensure they are acting in the best interests of those they are supposed to serve.
So let's talk about the current legal proceedings. This trial's been going on for a while now, right? What are some of the logistical challenges of handling a case of this magnitude?
Well, the sheer number of alleged victims and the volume of evidence is overwhelming. The trial is actually being held in a university lecture hall to accommodate everyone.
Wow, that's a powerful visual. A space normally dedicated to learning and knowledge now serving as the backdrop for this horrific case.
And to add to the complexity, many of the victims require psychological support.
Of course.
So there are psychologists and even support dogs present in the courtroom.
That's good to know that at least some support is being provided to the victims. What about Le Scouarnec? What sentence is he facing?
Well, he's currently serving a 15-year sentence for his 2020 conviction.
Right.
If convicted on these new charges, he faces a maximum of 20 years in prison.
So potentially over 3 decades behind bars.
That's right, although there's some debate about whether the sentences would be served consecutively or concurrently.
Either way, it's a long time, but does any amount of prison time truly address the damage that's been done?
That's a difficult question. For many of the victims, true justice may lie in seeing systemic change, in knowing that what happened to them will lead to better protection for children in the future.
This case has to be a catalyst for change. It needs to force a reevaluation of how we protect children from abuse, especially within institutions like the healthcare system.
I agree. The hope is that this trial will not only bring some measure of closure to the victims, but also serve as a wake-up call, prompting real reforms to prevent future tragedies.
So where does the trial stand now? What are the next steps?
Well, the trial is expected to last for another few months with numerous witnesses and experts set to testify.
It's a long and grueling process, but one that's absolutely necessary to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable.
And this trial is being closely watched, not just in France, but around the world. It's sparked a vital conversation about child protection, institutional responsibility, and the power dynamics that can lead to abuse.
It's a conversation that needs to continue long after the verdict is delivered. It's just mind-blowing to me that this could happen in so many different places for so many years.
Yeah.
We're talking multiple hospitals, clinics. It's like the scope of it is almost too big to even comprehend.
It really is, and I think that's why this trial has become such a lightning rod. It's not just about holding Le Scouarnec accountable, but about examining this whole system that allowed this to happen. How could so many people have missed the signs, or worse, ignored them?
And there were signs, his diaries, the spreadsheets. It's like he was practically leaving a trail of breadcrumbs.
Right, and some people did see those breadcrumbs. There was the 2005 conviction, the whistleblower in 2006. But the response was, to put it mildly, inadequate.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the gravity of the situation never really sunk in.
We have a system that's designed to protect children, and yet at every turn it seems like it failed. And then you add in the statute of limitations, which essentially silences so many victims. It's just devastating.
It is, and it raises some really uncomfortable questions about French society, about power structures, and about how we deal with accusations against authority figures.
Like that journalist said, there's a collective blindness that we need to address. We can't just assume that someone in a position of power is automatically trustworthy. We need to be more critical, more willing to listen to those who come forward, regardless of who the accused might be.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the human costs of all of this. We've talked about the systemic failures, but what about the victims?
Right.
Their lives have been irrevocably changed by this.
Reading their testimonies is just gut-wrenching. The trauma, the guilt, the sense of betrayal, it's all there. And for some like Mathis Vinet, the pain was just too much to bear.
Yeah, his story is a tragic reminder that the impact of abuse can last a lifetime. Even if justice is served, the scars remain. And it's not just the victims themselves who suffers, it's their families, their loved ones. The ripple effect is enormous.
It makes you wonder how many other Mathis Vinets are out there struggling silently with the aftermath of abuse. And how many abusers are still out there hiding behind their positions of power.
It's a chilling thought, but the fact that this trial is even happening, that Le Scouarnec is being held accountable, that's a sign of progress. It shows that things are changing, that society is starting to take these accusations more seriously.
And that's what we need to focus on. This trial needs to be a turning point. It needs to spark a real conversation about child protection, about institutional accountability, about believing victims. We can't let this be just another news story that fades away.
You're right. This has to be a catalyst for change. We need stronger safeguards, mandatory reporting procedures, better education and training for professionals who worked with children, and a culture that doesn't shy away from these difficult conversations.
We need to empower children to speak up, to know that they will be listened to and believed. We need to challenge the power dynamics that allow abuse to flourish. We need to do better for Mathis, for all the victims, and for every child out there.
Well, this deep dive has been intense, to say the least, but it's been important. We've uncovered some truly disturbing truths, but we've also seen glimpses of hope, of a future where children are truly protected.
Yeah, it all comes down to action, doesn't it? We can't just absorb this information and move on. We need to use it to advocate for change, to make a difference in our own communities.
Exactly. This case is a reminder that every single one of us has a role to play in preventing abuse. It's not just the responsibility of institutions, it's on all of us.
So as we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What can you do to create a world where children are safe, respected, and empowered? Think about it, talk about it, and most importantly, act on it. The future depends on it.